Hi! So you're at day 1 of Learn to Read Tarot in 5 days. This is a free video course on the basics of learning tarot. You don't have to be a beginner. This could be a refresher for you, but we are going to go through the very beginning of tarot. So coming from like the basics of the basics is what we're covering. So before we start, I want to make sure that you are in the Beauty Witch Coven. That is my Facebook group that I'm using as the community behind this course. So every single day in the group there's going to be a daily prompt, which is going to work as sort of like your homework. And there's also going to be the opportunity to ask me and any other group member questions and go through the materials a little bit more in depth if you need it. So make sure you are there. There's going to be a link on this page somewhere. I'm not really sure yet how it's going to be laid out, but make sure you join. Also, if you haven't downloaded it already, download the workbook because it's going to have little fill-in-the-blank spots for you to fill in while you watch this video and give you the opportunity to understand the homework and do a little more journaling for yourself. So now I'm going to jump right in and we're going to start with what is tarot? So essentially, the quick answer and the long answer is going to be basically the whole course. But the quick answer is that tarot is a specific deck of 78 cards, and this deck is typically, in modern times, used as a form of divination, but in history it has been known as like a playing card deck. So when we break down what a tarot deck is, it is actually 2 decks that are sort of smashed together as one. You have the first 22 cards as the major arcana and the other 56 cards as the minor arcana. So the major arcana cards are the ones that you've seen like on t-shirts, or you've seen them, I don't know, on the internet or on Instagram. These are sort of like the calling cards. They're called trump cards because when this was a playing card game, they would trump the lesser minor arcana cards and they would like help you win. But in divination, these cards have an overall archetypal meaning and they usually deal with big picture stuff. So getting a specific major arcana card can mean major changes or answers to a situation, if you want to think of it that way. The larger portion of the deck, the 56 other cards, are more similar to your traditional playing cards that you may know and play solitaire with. So the minor arcana is consisted of 4 suits, like playing cards, like I said. You have cups, wands, swords, and pentacles as the suits. And each suit has the same cards like it would in like a playing card deck. So you have ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And then you have the court cards or the face cards, which in tarot is page, knight, queen, king. So when you're reading the tarot, you want to think of each suit as having its own sort of identity or theme. Like pentacles is always associated with money, health, home, and other material possessions. It's also associated with earth. So whenever you look at those cards, you need to associate those symbols with that suit. And so on and so forth for the other suits. On day 3, we're actually going to be going through all of the minor arcana cards, so you'll be able to understand in more detail what each suit means and how you would interpret it in a reading. So speaking of readings, what is a tarot reading? A tarot reading is interpreting the symbols or artwork on the cards to get someone's future, fortune, or just an answer to a question. You interpret the symbols based on 3 different factors, based on the placement of the tarot card. Tarot cards are placed in spreads, which is sort of like a hand of cards, and where they fall in that hand determines sort of why they're giving the meaning they're giving. The second way you interpret a tarot card is based on the card's artwork itself. So this is where you'll find the specific symbols or archetype of that card. And thirdly, you interpret the card based on the overall spread. So this is where things like what suit it's in, where in the hero's journey that card is, which we'll get to that tomorrow. But you sort of look at the spread and interpret all the cards together as a whole. So in this case, you would just interpret the symbols of all the cards and how they interact together. And the thing that starts a tarot reading, or the reason why somebody would get a tarot reading, is because they have a question that they need an answer to. And the questions can be anything. It can be as simple as, what do I want for dinner? Or it could be as complex as, what does the universe have in store for me now? And the best questions to ask are open-ended questions, so no yes and no questions. Yes and no questions are just harder to answer because typically it's either yes or no. There's little room for ambiguity there. Alright, we've covered a lot so far, but the next part I'm going to go in is the history of tarot. This is going to be a super quick history, and as you can see in your workbook, you have a timeline, and there are a few spots that you need to fill in yourself, so pay attention really quick, because this part's going to be filled with lots of dates. So this history is answering, where did tarot come from? So in the 14th century, which is the 1300s, I always get confused how centuries work, but in the 14th century, playing cards becomes popular. People start playing cards. And then in the year 1441 is when the official invention of tarot is made. History has a hard time telling if this is true. This is the first written account of the vernacular of tarot. And like I said before, tarot is a playing card game, so it's not being used as divinatory purposes at this point. And I believe it was invented in Italy. So now we're moving up a century to the 16th century, which is the 1500s, and people are now using tarot cards to help answer cool questions they have. So they take a card and they use it to pick a random page in a book, and that page in the book has an answer to a question. So now we're seeing a little bit of divination coming into play. In 1660, the pattern that becomes the Tarot de Marseille deck, which is it's like sort of the original artwork for a tarot deck, is glimpsed. So the Tarot de Marseille isn't actually created yet, but that sort of style is making its way into tarot. And then 50 years later, in 1709, the official printing of the Tarot de Marseille deck is done. So now we're starting to see tarot being used more and more, and it's become a super popular game, and now people are starting to use it in a divinatory fashion. So in the late 18th century, which is the late 1700s, tarot becomes officially associated with the occult in France. And then a century later, in the later 19th century, which is the late 1800s, tarot becomes super popular as a way of divination in the Victorian era. So if you know anything about the Victorian era, it is considered like the spiritualist movement. This is when Ouija boards become popular, seances become popular, and it's all surrounding Victoria, Queen Victoria, trying to communicate with her dead husband. And so everybody wants to be like Queen Victoria, so they also try and communicate with their dead relatives. Hence why tarot and divination become popular. And so now we're moving up into the last century, which was the 20th century. And in 1909, the Rider-Waite deck is published. So this deck is the deck I'm going to be using for this course, and it sort of sets the stage for modern tarot. But it wasn't until 1959 that the deck has been published by Universal Books, which made the deck easier to purchase for just the general public. You didn't have to go to like specialty stores or in certain catalogs now to buy this deck. You could just walk to your nearest bookstore and buy it. And now in the postmodern world, tarot has become super popular with sort of the rise of the internet, because it's easy to share, it's easy to buy, and it's super readily available for anybody who wants to take part. I mean, look at the course I'm offering you guys. Anybody could join. Literally, in the whole world. We have people from all over the world joining. That's how easily accessible tarot is now. And also, this is a quick historical tidbit, 2 things that happened in the 70s to set the stage for modern or our postmodern Instagram tarot world was, 1, artists started creating their own decks based on the Rider-Waite deck, and 2, people stopped paying attention to what the guidebook said and they started reading the tarot intuitively. So I'm a huge believer of reading tarot intuitively, so that idea or practice has definitely transcended now to the modern era. Okay, so that was a lot to take in today. Make sure you go to the Beauty Witch Coven Facebook group and answer the daily prompt, because that's going to be considered your homework. Anyway, I cannot wait to see you guys tomorrow, and I'll see you in the Facebook group.